When I was growing up, I always thought family was supposed to be your rock, the people you could lean on no matter what. But somewhere along the way, that foundation cracked, and nothing has been the same since. I was 28 when everything started to unravel. My name's Alex, and I've spent most of my life trying to keep the peace between my parents and my older sister Laura. The three of us had always had a complicated relationship, but for the most part, I kept my head down and kept the peace. Or so I thought. It was a late spring evening when I found out my mother had sold my dad's car. And not just any car. It was the one he'd worked so hard for. The one I remembered him driving me around in when I was little. The car that still carried so many memories. But here I was, standing in the middle of the living room, completely blindsided by my mother's casual announcement. "I sold the car," she said nonchalantly, as if it were just a regular Tuesday. My stomach sank. "What? Why? You didn't even ask me first." She shrugged, as if it wasn't a big deal. "Well, we needed the money, and Laura's vacation is coming up. She's had a rough time lately, and I thought she deserved it." Laura had just gone through a divorce, so I understood that she was struggling, but this felt off. "Mom, that's not fair," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "That was Dad's car. You didn't even think to ask me?" She gave me a tired look, the kind of look she always gave when she was done listening. "You're being unreasonable. You've always been difficult about money. We had to do this." I tried to keep my composure, but it was hard. I'd been through my own struggles, sure, but this was too much. I felt like I was losing grip on everything. First, my dad was gone, and now my mom was making decisions like this without even considering how it might affect me. "Fine," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "But I'm getting it back." Her eyes narrowed. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be." I didn't know how, but I had to get that car back. It wasn't just about the car itself. It was about standing my ground, about showing my mom that I wasn't going to be dismissed like this. I wasn't going to let them bulldoze over me just because they thought I'd roll over quietly. So, the next day, I went to the dealership. I wasn't sure what I was expecting, but somehow I walked out of there with the car back in my hands. The relief that washed over me was temporary, though, because as soon as I got back to my mom's house, I saw Laura and my mother sitting there talking in low voices. The moment I walked in, my mother's eyes snapped to me. "You shouldn't have done that," she said, her tone sharp. "You've made this harder for everyone." I stood there, holding my ground. "You didn't give me a choice, Mom. This isn't just about money. It's about respect." Her face softened, but only for a moment. "You're not understanding the bigger picture, Alex. Laura needs this. You don't." Laura, sitting on the couch, had that same expression she always wore when things weren't going her way. A mix of exhaustion and irritation. "You're being dramatic, Alex," she said, barely looking up. "It's just a car. Just a car." The words hit me harder than they should have. I'd spent so many years trying to keep the peace, to be the good son, but no one ever seemed to care what I thought. They just expected me to bend, to give in when they needed something. My whole life had been about sacrificing for them, and I was tired. "I don't think you understand how hard I've worked for everything I have," I said, keeping my voice steady, but feeling the anger bubbling beneath the surface. "You guys take things for granted. Dad worked hard for that car. It wasn't just a thing to sell off when you needed money." Laura's eyes flickered with annoyance. "It's always about Dad, isn't it?" she shot back. "You think I don't have problems? You think I didn't suffer enough with my divorce?" I paused, feeling the weight of her words. I had always tried to be understanding about what she was going through, but at that moment, I felt a wave of resentment. It was like she was turning everything back onto herself, as usual, making me feel small for even questioning her. "I get it, Laura," I said through gritted teeth, "but you don't get to make decisions like that for the family. I'm not your punching bag." Her expression softened, but I knew the damage was done. We were both stubborn in our own ways, and this wasn't going to be resolved anytime soon. I turned on my heel and left, slamming the door behind me. As I walked down the street, my thoughts raced. Why was it always this way? Why did it feel like no matter what I did, I could never escape this toxic dynamic? I wasn't the one who was supposed to be the villain in this story, yet somehow I was always cast in that role. My phone buzzed in my pocket, and I pulled it out to see a message from my mom. "Can you please come home? We need to talk." I sighed, feeling a mixture of frustration and exhaustion. I didn't want to go back, but I knew I had to. There was no escaping this family drama. I didn't have a choice. And just like that, I found myself walking back into the house, prepared for the next chapter in this ongoing battle. I stood there in the doorway, staring at my phone, letting my mom's message sit in my inbox for a few seconds. It was like an invisible weight pressing down on my chest. I didn't want to go back, but I knew that running away wasn't an option. Family had a way of pulling you back in, no matter how much you tried to step outside its orbit. Taking a deep breath, I shoved the phone into my pocket and walked back into the house. The familiar smell of coffee and old furniture hit me as soon as I opened the door. It wasn't a bad smell, just home. But now it felt like a place I couldn't quite belong to anymore. Every corner seemed to echo with all the things I'd let slide for far too long. I found them sitting in the living room, my mom perched on the edge of the couch, and Laura slouched next to her, both of them looking uncomfortable. My mom didn't even look up when I walked in, and Laura's gaze shifted from the floor to me, like she was trying to figure out if I'd just let it all slide or if I'd keep pressing. "Alex," my mom finally said, her voice a little softer than before, "you need to understand. I didn't do this to hurt you." I tried to hold back the bitterness rising in me, but I was done pretending. "You didn't ask me," I said flatly, leaning against the doorframe. "You didn't even think to talk to me. All of a sudden, I'm just supposed to roll with whatever decision you and Laura make." "I told you, Laura needed that vacation," my mom said again, like it was supposed to make sense. "She's been through a lot, Alex. You don't understand how hard this has been for her." I could feel my blood starting to simmer. "I get it," I said, my tone biting now. "She's been through a divorce, but that doesn't give her, or you, the right to do whatever you want with things that aren't yours." Laura shifted on the couch, finally speaking up. "You're making a big deal out of nothing, Alex. It's just a car. It's not like it's going to change anything." I froze for a moment, trying to process her words. Just a car. That was how they saw it. But for me, it wasn't just a car. It was a piece of my dad. It was a memory. And it felt like they'd just sold off a part of him without a second thought. "It's not just about the car," I said, quieter now, the frustration still thick in my voice. "It's about respect. It's about you guys treating me like I don't matter. And it's about Dad. He worked so hard for that. I can't just sit back and let you wipe him away like that." I could see the flicker of guilt in my mom's eyes, but she quickly masked it. "I didn't mean for it to feel like that. I'm just trying to do what's best for everyone." But I couldn't shake the feeling that it was always about what was best for Laura. What about me? When did I ever get to have a say in any of this? "You keep saying for everyone," I said, trying to keep the frustration out of my voice. "But I don't feel like I'm part of that equation. I've been here my whole life, always the one trying to make sure things don't fall apart. But this is too much." Laura sighed heavily, like she was already over the conversation. "Look, if it means that much to you, fine. I don't care about the stupid car. I'm just saying, you need to stop making everything harder than it is." That was when it hit me. For all the years I'd tried to make things work, I was always the one carrying the weight, the burden of keeping everyone happy, making sacrifices and pretending it was fine. But Laura didn't care. My mom didn't care. They'd always put their needs first, and I was just supposed to take it. "You don't get it," I said quietly, my voice tight. "You don't get how much this hurts. You don't get that I've been the one holding everything together, and now it feels like I'm the one who's been left out in the cold." The room was silent for a long moment, and I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, every word I'd just spoken lingering in the air. This wasn't just about the car anymore. This was about everything I'd sacrificed, about all the times I'd been there for them, only to be left behind when I needed something. "I'm not doing this anymore," I said, standing up straighter, trying to regain some sense of control. "I'm done being the one who always has to clean up the mess. I'm done being the one who sacrifices for everyone else." My mom looked at me, her expression softening, but it wasn't enough. She'd always been good at making things feel like it was my fault, but I wasn't buying it anymore. Laura just rolled her eyes and muted something under her breath, but it didn't matter. I could feel the walls closing in around me, The weight of everything we'd been through crashing down. I couldn't fix this, not anymore. "I'm leaving," I said, my voice steady now, even though my insides were anything but. "I can't keep doing this. I need space. I need to figure out what's next for me." With that, I turned and walked out of the room, my footsteps echoing through the house. I wasn't sure where I was going, but I knew I couldn't stay here anymore. Not in this house, not with them. It felt like everything I had worked for, everything I had fought for, had just been swept away in a moment. As I closed the door behind me, I realized something. I wasn't just leaving this house. I was leaving behind everything I'd held on to for so long, and I had no idea what was waiting for me on the other side. I didn't know where I was going when I left, but I needed to get out. The weight of the argument was still fresh in my mind, a constant hum in the background of my thoughts. It was hard to breathe in that house anymore, like I was choking on everything I'd never said, every moment I'd let slide in the name of family. I walked aimlessly for a while, not really caring where my feet took me. The streets were quiet, the world moving around me while I stood still, trying to gather my thoughts. The city had never felt so big or so empty. A few blocks later, I ended up at a small park, one of those places that no one really noticed unless you were looking for peace. I sat on a bench, my mind still reeling from everything that had happened. The fight with my mom, the way Laura had barely acknowledged it. It felt like everything I had done for them, every sacrifice, had been for nothing. I pulled out my phone and saw the several missed calls from my mom, along with a few texts. "Alex, please call me. We need to talk." The message was calm, almost pleading, but I wasn't ready to talk. Not yet. Not until I figured out what was really going on inside my head. I scrolled past the messages and opened up my contacts. I thought about calling a few people, old friends who I used to talk to back when things were simpler. But I didn't. Not this time. I wasn't sure I wanted advice. What I wanted was clarity. I needed to figure this out on my own. I spent the next hours sitting there, watching the sun start to dip below the horizon. The park was quiet, and for a moment I felt like I was the only one in the world. It was a strange kind of peace, but I knew it wasn't going to last. Eventually I stood up, stretched, and started walking again. But this time, it felt different. I didn't know what I was doing, but I knew it wasn't the same as before. The weight in my chest had loosened just a little, and that was enough to give me the courage to make a decision I should have made a long time ago. The truth was, I had spent my whole life putting others first. I'd always been the one to take care of things, to keep everything from falling apart. But what about me? Who was looking out for me? No one, it seemed. Not my mom, not Laura. I was just a convenience for them, a fallback when they needed someone to fix things. But I was done with that. I went home later that evening, but not to the same place I had left. It wasn't the house anymore. It was just a building filled with memories, most of them ones I was starting to question. When I walked through the door, the tension was still there, thick in the air. My mom was in the kitchen, her back to me, busy with something on the counter. Laura was sitting on the couch, phone in hand, barely glancing at me as I walked in. I could feel their eyes on me. They were waiting for me to crack, waiting for me to apologize or cave in like I always had. But I wasn't going to do that this time. This time things were going to be different. "Alex," my mom started, turning around with that same tired look on her face. "We need to talk about what happened today." I nodded, walking toward the living room. "Yeah, we do," I said, my voice firm but calm. "But not here, not like this." She looked at me, confusion flickering across her face. "What do you mean?" "I'm moving out," I said, and the words felt right as soon as I said them. "I can't keep doing this. I can't keep letting you and Laura make decisions for me. I need to find my own path, my own space." The room was silent for a beat. Laura finally looked up from her phone, her expression unreadable. My mom, on the other hand, seemed taken aback, like she hadn't expected this at all. "You're what?" she asked, her voice a little shaky. "Alex, you can't just leave. We're your family." "I know," I said, my tone steady. "But I've been trying to be your family for years, Mom, and every time I end up on the outside. This isn't working anymore. I'm not asking for your approval. I'm telling you I'm leaving." The words were out there now, and I could feel the floodgates inside me start to open. All the years of resentment, of trying to live up to expectations that weren't mine to carry, It all came rushing forward, but it wasn't anger anymore. It was a relief. My mom's face softened, but there was still that edge of disbelief in her eyes. This is about the car, isn't it? You're still angry about that? I shook my head. No, it's not just about the car. It's about everything. All the years I've spent trying to hold things together for you, for Laura, and in the end, I'm still the one who gets left behind. Her eyes softened, but she didn't say anything. I didn't need her to. I wasn't looking for an apology anymore. I wasn't looking for any kind of validation. I just needed to do this for myself. Laura got up from the couch and crossed the room, standing next to our mom. Alex, she started, but there was a sharpness in her voice that hadn't been there before. You can't just leave like this. We're family, and families don't just walk away from each other. I didn't flinch. I've been walking away for years, Laura said, but this time it's permanent. The room fell silent again, and I could see both of them processing what I had just said. But there was no turning back now. I wasn't going to let them dictate my life anymore. It was time for me to figure out what came next. It wasn't easy, not by any stretch of the imagination. Walking out of that house felt like leaving behind more than just a roof over my head. It felt like I was cutting off a part of myself, a part I had spent so many years trying to hold on to. But as the days passed, the heaviness lifted just a little more each time. I moved into a small apartment on the other side of town. It wasn't much, barely more than a few rooms and a kitchen that I could barely fit in. But it was mine. The feeling of independence, of knowing that I didn't have to answer to anyone, was both liberating and terrifying. I spent the first couple of nights sitting in silence, letting the emptiness of the place sink in, and for the first time in years, I wasn't worrying about what my mom or Laura thought of me. For the first time, I was free to think about what I wanted, but freedom wasn't all it was cracked up to be. The first few weeks were full of late-night thoughts and moments of doubt. I found myself reaching for my phone every time something went wrong, expecting to see a message from my mom or Laura asking me to come back. But nothing came, and that was when the reality set in. They weren't coming for me. No one was. I had to be the one to step up. I found a small cafe nearby, a quiet place with just enough noise to make me feel like I wasn't completely alone. I started going there every morning, grabbing coffee and sitting with my laptop to work. It became my routine, my way of carving out a new life for myself. It was small, but it was mine. As the weeks went by, I grew used to the silence of the apartment. I decorated it little by little, adding things that felt right, not because they were expected, but because they were what I wanted. A few pictures, a couple of bookshelves filled with novels I hadn't read in years. It was simple, but it felt like a new beginning. Then, one night, my phone buzzed. I glanced at the screen, half expecting it to be a work email, but instead, it was a message from Laura. Can we talk? I stared at the message for a long moment, unsure of what to do. Part of me wanted to ignore it, to keep the distance between us. But another part of me, one I didn't like to admit existed, was curious. Maybe this was the moment she finally realized what had happened, that I wasn't just some afterthought she could brush aside. I hesitated for a while, fingers hovering over the keyboard. What would be the point? But I typed out a quick response anyway. What about? I want to apologize for everything. I should have listened to you. I didn't know what to make of that. It was a surprise, to say the least. Over the years, Laura had always been the one who did the least, but expected the most. She never seemed to notice how her actions affected others, least of all me. So this, whatever it was, felt like a step in the right direction. I thought about it for a while before finally agreeing to meet. A few hours later, we were sitting in a small park near my apartment. Laura was fidgeting, something I hadn't seen from her in years. The usual bravado was gone, replaced by something else, something softer. I'm sorry, Alex, she started, looking down at the ground. I never meant for any of this to happen. I guess I was so caught up in my own stuff that I didn't even see what I was doing to you. I nodded, not sure what to say. The past few weeks had given me time to reflect on everything, on what I had been through and what I had let slide for too long. I had spent so many years trying to keep the peace, trying to fix things, but none of that mattered anymore. The damage had already been done. You've always put me second, Laura, I said quietly, and I don't know if I can just forgive that, not after everything." Her eyes met mine, a mix of regret and sadness there. "I know I've been selfish," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "But I didn't know how to fix it, Alex. I didn't know how to see things from your side." For a moment, there was nothing but silence. I had heard this before. I'd heard her say that she didn't know how to change, that she didn't know how to understand. But now, hearing it again, something inside me clicked. I had to let go of the idea that she was ever going to be the sister I had always wanted her to be. She wasn't that person. She never had been. "I'm not asking for your forgiveness, Alex," she said, almost as if reading my mind. "I just want you to know I see you now. I see what I've done." It wasn't much, but it was a start. I wasn't sure where we would go from here. Maybe we could rebuild. Maybe we couldn't. But for the first time, I felt like we were speaking the same language, even if it was a little late. "I'm not going to go back to how things were," I said firmly. "I can't, but I'll listen. That's all I can offer." And that was it. We sat there for a while, just talking about nothing and everything at once. It wasn't a grand reconciliation, but it was a moment of understanding. Maybe that was enough for now. Later that night, I returned to my apartment, a little lighter than before. The weight of the past few weeks hadn't disappeared completely, but it didn't feel so heavy anymore. I had made the choice to stand up for myself and to take control of my life, and now, for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was finally walking the path I was supposed to be on. The weeks that followed felt like a slow healing process. After that conversation with Laura, I didn't feel like everything was fixed, but there was a shift. A small, almost imperceptible shift, but a shift nonetheless. It was like opening a window in a room that had been sealed shut for years. The air wasn't completely fresh yet, but it was getting there. I kept to my routine: work, the cafe, time to myself. But now, I felt more present in my own life, more aware of the choices I was making. No longer was I reacting to everyone else's expectations, living my life based on what they thought was best for me. I was finally making decisions for myself, even if that meant stepping away from everything I had once thought was a given. At first, I didn't hear from my mom. I figured it was because she was giving me space, but the silence was heavy. For days, I wondered if I'd made the right choice. Had I burned the bridges too thoroughly? Was this really what I needed? But then one evening, as I was sitting at home, the phone rang. I picked it up, almost instinctively, and saw my mom's name on the screen. My heart raced for a second, but I steadied myself. If this was going to work, if we were going to figure out what came next, it had to be done on my terms. "Hello?" I said, my voice steady. "Alex, it's Mom," she said, and her tone was softer than I remembered. "Can we talk?" I didn't hesitate this time. "Sure," I said, "let's talk." We made arrangements to meet at a quiet diner downtown, the same place we'd gone to when I was younger, before everything got complicated. I showed up early, sitting in one of the booths near the back, waiting for her. I could feel the nerves building up in my chest, but I kept telling myself, "You're doing this for you." When she walked in, she looked different. There was no anger in her eyes, no bitterness like I'd seen in the past. She looked older, sure, but there was something else, a vulnerability I hadn't noticed before. She slid into the booth across from me, and for a moment we both just sat there in silence. Finally, she spoke. "I'm sorry, Alex," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I'm sorry for all the years I put my own needs first. I know I've hurt you, and I didn't see it until now." I sat back, trying to absorb her words. It was strange to hear her say them, and I wasn't sure how to respond. For so long, I had waited for this moment, for her to finally see how much I had sacrificed and how much I had given up for the sake of our family. But now that it was here, I wasn't sure it mattered as much as I thought it would. "You didn't see it because you didn't want to see it," I said quietly. "I spent my whole life trying to make everyone happy, trying to fix things that were never my responsibility. But I'm done with that now. I can't keep pretending I'm okay with being the one who always has to bend." Her face softened and she nodded. "I know. I should have been there for you, Alex. I've always been so focused on what I thought was best for the family. But I didn't realize it was destroying us. I didn't realize it was destroying you." For a long moment, neither of us spoke. It wasn't comfortable, but it was real. And in that moment, I realized something. I didn't need her apology. What I needed was for her to understand, to see that I wasn't the same person I had been when I left. I wasn't the person who would just accept things for the sake of keeping the peace. And that was okay. "I'm not asking you to fix everything, Mom," I said, my voice steady. "I'm just asking you to see me. To see who I am now, not who you think I should be." She reached across the table, her hand trembling slightly as she placed it over mine. "I see you, Alex," she whispered. "I see you now." It wasn't a perfect resolution. There were still things left unsaid, things that might never be fully healed. But in that moment, I knew we were both trying, and that was enough. As we finished our coffee, the conversation shifted to lighter topics, old memories, little things we used to enjoy talking about. It was awkward at first, but by the time we parted ways, I felt like we had taken the first real step toward rebuilding something that had been lost for so long. I didn't rush back into their lives. I couldn't, not yet. But I kept the door open. Slowly, cautiously, we began to rebuild a relationship, one that was based on mutual respect and understanding. It wasn't the family I had once dreamed of, but it was a family I could live with. And for the first time in a long time, I wasn't trying to fix anything. I was just letting it be. The apartment I'd moved into felt more like home than it ever had. It wasn't perfect, but it was mine. And I wasn't alone anymore. I had friends, I had my work, and most importantly, I had a sense of self that I had never known before. I still think about those years, the ones where I sacrificed everything for the sake of keeping the peace. I still feel the sting of the times I was overlooked, of the times I felt like I was nothing more than an afterthought. But now, when those thoughts come, I don't let them control me. I've learned that the only person who can define my worth is me. And for the first time, I'm okay with that story, too. After my stepsister wrongly accused me of adultery with her husband, my family left me. I received an email reflecting back years later. I didn't anticipate it. It was an ordinary day. After work, I was relaxing in my room. As I heard the front door smash, I was browsing through my phone. Sarah, my stepsister, came in like a hurricane. Her eyes were swollen from sobbing and her cheeks was crimson dot. She yelled before I could even inquire what was wrong. "My life was wrecked by you." I blinked as I tried to take in her words. "What are you discussing?" Confused, I asked. With a shaky finger pointed at my face, she stomped over to me. Have you been having sex with Jason?" "Jason, I'm aware of what you did." Her spouse. I felt sick to my stomach. "You mean you're serious now? That's crazy." Sarah wasn't paying attention though. She was frenzied, making charges all over the place. "Don't tell me lies. The texts were visible to me. I am aware that you have been skulking behind my back." I was taken aback. Stealing texts, outside of family get-togethers, Jason and I had seldom communicated. It seemed so ridiculous to think that I was having an affair with him. I was unable to comprehend it at all. Before I could finish speaking, my parents entered. After glancing at Sarah, my mother hurried over to join her. "Sarah, what's happening, honey?" Sarah faced them, her voice faltering and laced with feigned tears. "She has been having affairs with Jason. I managed to capture them." My dad's cheeks flushed as my mom gasped and covered her lips. He fixed me with this accusatory, icy gaze. "Is this accurate?" he inquired. "No, of course not." With a mixture of terror and rage, I bounded back. This is something Sarah is making up. However, what I stated was irrelevant. They were already persuaded. My mother was mumbling, "I can't believe this," while shaking her head. "I believed you to be superior to this. Listen to me, Mom," I begged. "I took no action. Nothing is happening between Jason and me." Sarah, continuing having fun. The victim's hand gripped my mother's arm. "Don't fall for her falsehoods. For years she has been envious of me. Her goal was to destroy my marriage. Feeling envious? Do you mean me?" I couldn't contain my laughter, despite the fact that this was not hilarious at all. "Sarah, it's you who has always been envious. My dad was fed up with your constant attempts to discredit me. He lost his temper. You can't keep denying it while we stand here. Sarah would not fabricate this. I thought I was in a bad dream. How could they accept her without requesting evidence? Not even taking into account my side of the story? Please, Dad. I gave it another go. Consider it. Why would I ever act in that manner?" Even though Jason and I don't chat much, my remarks were being ignored. My dad just shook his head, and my mom started weeping. "This family has been harmed enough by you. You must go," he replied. My heart stopped beating. "What? I heard you. He spoke aggressively. Gather your belongings and leave. I couldn't speak. I was being kicked out of the house by my own parents because they thought I had an affair with my stepsister's husband, without any proof at all. The earth seemed to have been torn out from beneath me. I was expecting that Sarah would show some remorse or acknowledge the absurdity of this, but all she did was grin and wipe away the phony tears. She was well aware of her actions. I went back to my parents in the hopes that they would reconsider. Please? My voice broke as I said, "You're doing something wrong." However, they refused to budge. My mother refused to give me a glance. My dad just reiterated, "Leave now." I had no other option. In a haze, I went to my room, gathered a few items, and walked out of the house. My heart was racing and my mind was racing. How did this occur? In just a few minutes, how did my life completely change? The weight of what had just transpired struck me like a ton of bricks as I was walking down the street. My relatives. I had just been kicked out by the folks who were meant to love and support me no matter what. It was all due to a falsehood. I was sitting on a park bench looking at my phone, wondering if I should contact anyone or not. But who would believe me? My folks didn't. Sarah had everyone enamored with her. I was totally alone. I hardly sensed the coldness of the night air. My mind was too numb to wander. My entire existence had been upended, and I was at a loss for what to do. I just knew I couldn't turn back, not until I managed to establish my innocence. However, since everyone has already made up their opinions, how can you show that you didn't do something? For hours I sat there attempting to make sense of everything. However, despite my best efforts, nothing made sense. I was left to pick up the pieces of my broken existence, and all I knew was that Sarah had won for the time being. It was like entering a blank as I left my parents' house that evening. I wasn't only abandoning a location. Everything I believed I could rely on was abandoning me. I had been deceived by my family. It's simple. What's the worst? They weren't even interested enough to listen to me. I kept mentally reliving the scenario, my parents' icy looks and their unquestioning acceptance of Sarah's falsehoods. It infuriated me. How were they able to? I had always been the one ignored, the one attempting to maintain harmony in our family. As Sarah reveled in the attention. And now, they have completely abandoned me without any proof. I had nowhere to go, and the night was freezing. I spent what seemed like hours roaming the streets. My thoughts were racing the entire time. How could I have earned this? My parents trusted me, but why? Did they really not care about me? After a while, I ended myself in front of Megan's apartment. My best buddy was her, the one individual I knew I could rely on. I thought she may be asleep when I knocked on her door, but she opened it practically instantly. She had a puzzled and worried expression on her face when she spotted me red-eyed and holding a bag of hurriedly packed clothes. What took place? Pulling me inside, she requested. I lost it at that point. I began to cry as the weight of everything fell on me. I attempted to explain in between breathless gasps. "Sarah." "I said," she said. She informed my folks that I was having an affair with Jason. Megan's eyes became wide with surprise. "What? That's absurd. I am aware." Wiping my face, I said, "However, my parents, they took her word for it. I was expelled by them." She embraced me tightly and let me to cry. "It's unbelievable that they do that." Softly, she said, "Not even an opportunity to explain was given to you." I gave a head shake. They were unwilling to listen to it. They simply believed what she said. Megan sighed in frustration. "That is incorrect. This isn't something you deserve." I fell asleep on Megan's couch that evening. I didn't get much sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw my parents' dissatisfied glares and Sarah's pleased face. My entire life seemed to have been torn apart, and I was left to attempt to put it all back together. Megan poured us coffee the following morning and took a seat across from me. "What is the plan then?" she inquired. I stared into my cup and shrugged. "I'm not sure. I suppose I'll have to get lodging, determine my next course of action." She answered without hesitation. "You can remain here as long as you need to. I didn't want to intrude, but I was appreciative. Regards, Meg." "Thank you very much, but I can't remain here forever. We got a few days to work things out." While I tried to orient myself, I stayed at her house. To conserve money, I began applying for more jobs and searched for flats. However, my family's treachery loomed large over me. Every time I considered it, A mixture of anguish and rage made my chest clench. I made a couple attempts to contact my parents in the hopes that they would at least listen, but each call ended up in voicemail. They didn't respond when I texted them. More than anything, it stung that they seemed to no longer see me. I returned home one day in a state of despair. I debated whether or not to knock while standing on the porch. My mother opened the door as I did. Her expression was aloof and icy. "You're not supposed to be here," she remarked bluntly. "Please, Mom," I pleaded. "Could we simply have a conversation?" "I didn't follow Sarah's advice. You must trust me." She gave a headshake. "We've already decided you're discarding me because of something I didn't do, Mom." My voice broke as I said, "I am your daughter." Something sparked in her eyes. Perhaps guilt. But in a flash it was gone. "You must go." She said it again. For a time, I waited for her to alter her mind, but she didn't. I felt more alone than ever as I stood on the porch after she just shut the door. I came to a realization as I was leaving. They had no intention of changing their minds. Sarah was their choice. Furthermore, nothing I did or said would change anything. I knew I had to move on, even if it was a difficult pill to swallow. I poured myself into seeking a new apartment once I was back at Megan's. Despite my limited savings, I managed to find a small studio apartment that I could afford. It was a beginning, but not much. Even though it was little and rather dilapidated, having a place of my own felt nice, and Megan helped me move in. However, the treachery persisted. I lie on the mattress I borrowed from Megan every night. I reflected about my parents, how quickly they abandoned me, and how little they must have thought of me to blindly believe Sarah's falsehoods. It was a wound that refused to go away, despite my best efforts to concentrate on starting over. Through it all, Megan was my pillar of support. She reminded me that I wasn't alone and helped me stay grounded. She would reply, "You're stronger than you think. You'll overcome this." I also wanted to think she was real. However, it felt like a dagger twisting in my chest every time I thought of my family, the ones who were meant to love me without conditions. How can you get over that? When the basis of your life has been torn away, how can you rebuild it? Although I had no answers, I was certain of one thing. Sarah's falsehoods could not define who I was. Despite the fact that it seemed impossible, I had to find a way to continue. I then began attempting to reconstruct my life piece by piece. It was strange at first to settle into my small flat. Not much. It was a single room with a kitchenette that looked like it was from a comedy from the 1990s, a bed in the corner, and a little table. It was mine though. And following all of the events that had taken place, I considered it a minor triumph to have something of my own. I just had the essential pieces of furniture that Megan helped me locate. It was simple, almost melancholy, but it was a beginning. The initial days were difficult. When I got home from work, I would just sit and gaze at the walls. The quiet was overwhelming. There was always some background noise while I lived with my parents, even on the calmest days. Sarah's incessant conversation, my mom's cooking, or the TV in the living room. It seemed hollow now that I was alone. Even though it was awful, I knew I couldn't allow myself to go out of control. My family had already gone, and I wasn't going to lose myself. I thus began off tiny. I jotted down the things I had to accomplish, unpack, obtain some staple foods. To make the space feel more like a home and less like a box, consider adding some decorations. Unpacking took little time. Just a few clothing, a few books, and the necessities Megan had given me when I initially moved here were all I had. Getting groceries, however, was a journey. I had to carefully consider my spending and make the most of every dollar. I was determined to make it work even though I wasn't making a lot of money. A used rug to cover the cold floor, a couple of inexpensive picture frames, and a plant that I was quite certain I would kill within a week were among the items I acquired to liven up the area. After making a few excursions to the thrift shop. Nevertheless, it had an impact. My flat gradually began to feel more like a place where I could live and less like a makeshift refuge. My job became my haven. I gave my job my all, taking on extra work whenever I could. Although it was unglamorous, it occupied my thoughts. Every time my mind wandered, I wanted that. They eventually returned to my parents, to Sarah, to the life I had lost too. The only way to avoid those thoughts was to stay busy. Megan would frequently check in with me, and if she felt I was becoming too preoccupied, would take me out for a stroll or coffee. "You must take a rest." She would say this while shoving an expensive coffee cup into my hands. And to be honest, those times were beneficial. It served as a reminder that I wasn't entirely alone myself. Megan persuaded me to accompany her to a nearby farmer's market, even though my family could have deserted me one weekend. I wasn't in the mood, but I went along with it since it was one of those beautiful days when the weather was too nice to remain indoors. While we strolled around the booths, something changed. I had a small glimmer of joy for the first time in weeks. It was only a flicker, not much, but it was there. We laughed and talked about everything but the chaos that had overtaken my life throughout the day. I recognized how much I needed a respite from the burden I carried about all the time. I felt lighter by the time we departed. Better, but not quite fine. I came to a realization that evening when I was sitting in my apartment, admiring the little arrangement of flowers I had rashly purchased at the market. I was beginning to put myself back together. It was certainly not a quick transition, nor was it a spectacular one. However, I was gradually collecting up the pieces. Weeks passed, and I started to feel less numb than I had when I initially moved here. I began to develop a pattern: get up and start working, return home, tidy up the place, and do it again. It was steady, but not thrilling. I also felt like I had some control over my life for the first time in a long time. Decorating the walls was a task I had been putting off until one evening. It may seem corny, but hanging those old pictures and a couple posters I liked had a big impact. I seemed to be asserting my ownership over the area. Every photo and tiny ornament served as a reminder that this was my life, right now. I was creating a life, not the one I had anticipated having. However, there were still difficult days. There were days when I woke up feeling like everything was weighing me down. Getting out of bed was a struggle on such days. However, I persisted in moving forward, telling myself that this was only a temporary situation. I wouldn't have to stay in that gloomy location indefinitely. I had not kept a diary since I was a teenager, but I started doing it again. It was helpful to put my ideas down on paper so they wouldn't feel so overwhelming. I wrote about everything: my disillusionment in my parents, my rage at Sarah, and my anxieties about the future. Although it wasn't a miracle remedy, it made everything seem more doable to me. Even now, one entry sticks out. "I'm still here, but I have no idea what tomorrow will bring. I continue to battle." And perhaps, just possibly, that's sufficient. I saw that I was gradually letting go of the rage as the weeks stretched into months. Not completely, but enough to prevent me from being consumed by it. I turned my attention to what I could manage: my future, my apartment, and my work. And even though I never really recovered from the agony of losing my family, it became a part of my tale rather than the entire thing. It was difficult to pick up the pieces, and on some days I felt like I was going backward rather than ahead. But as I made progress and achieved modest victories, I started to see a future that focused on what I might create for myself rather than what I had lost. And that was something to be cherished. I had been living in my small apartment for months. I had settled into a groove, but life was still far from ideal. I was busy at work, and Megan's unwavering support helped me remember that I wasn't all alone. The pain of being abandoned by my family, however, never truly went away. I could never forget how they threw me away, no matter how hard I tried to concentrate on the future, blindly accepting Sarah's falsehoods. Then everything changed one night. After work, I was idly browsing through my phone on my couch when I saw an email notification. I didn't recognize the sender's name, but the subject line caught my attention. "The truth is, something you deserve to know." My heart began to race. Something urged me to open it even though I was hesitant for a while, wondering whether it was a fraud. My breath stuck in my throat as soon as I did. Jason sent it. Sarah's spouse, Jason, the one she said I had slept with. The email began simply, "Hey, I need to set the record straight, even though I realize this is probably unexpected. It's time for you to know the truth. I've been keeping this to myself for far too long. I experienced a range of feelings, including bewilderment, rage, and an odd sort of optimism. Why now? Why?" I continued reading after all this time, my hands shaking as Jason explained everything. Sarah told a fib, he composed. I am aware that she falsely accused you of having an affair with me. In actuality, it was Sarah who cheated. I repeatedly read that phrase while blinking. Is this a genuine thing? Jason continued by giving a detailed explanation. Sarah had been dating a man from her workplace. She panicked and made up a narrative to hide her identity when Jason discovered it. I was blamed for something I didn't do in that narrative. She reasoned that it would be simpler to blame me than to own up to her own errors. Jason said, I should have spoken up sooner. However, I was too upset and heartbroken at the moment. I apologize for letting Sarah's falsehoods take control. The email included screenshots of the conversations and emails that Sarah and her coworker had exchanged, as well as pictures of the two of them together. Everything was there, unquestionable evidence that she had been lying all along. I gazed at my computer screen, a tornado of feelings rushing through me. Relief, anger, sadness. Everything was coming to me at once. The truth had finally come to light after all this time, all the suffering and all the treachery. Jason left a little remark at the conclusion of the email. I hope this is useful. I apologize for all we've caused you to go through. I was unsure about how to feel. A part of me was happy that I wasn't insane and that the truth was at last known, that I wasn't who my family had portrayed me as. A part of me, though, was angry, enraged with Jason for maintaining such a lengthy silence, furious with Sarah for her falsehoods, and angry with my parents because you blindly believed her. For what seemed like hours, I sat there, gazing at the email. My thoughts are racing. Now what was I meant to do? Do I have to face my parents? Shall I get in touch with Sarah? I had the proof right in front of me. However, I wasn't certain if it would have any impact. Now would they trust me at all? I sent Megan a copy of the email. My phone buzzed within minutes. She was the one. She exclaimed, "Holy crap!" as soon as I lifted it up. "Are you all right?" "I'm not sure," I acknowledged. "It's a lot, even though I'm happy to have the truth at last." Megan didn't encourage me to speak further. I vented, and she simply listened, allowing me to take my time processing things. I sat in quiet after we hung up, trying to think of what to do next. I couldn't keep this knowledge to myself. Even if the truth wouldn't make everything better, my family needed to know it. To realize how mistaken they had been, they had to see the evidence. However, I was a little afraid to confront them, afraid of their response. It was intimidating to consider re-entering their lives after everything they had done. However, I was aware that I couldn't continue to live in fear of Sarah's deception. Confronting them with the truth was the only way I could receive the closure I needed. I spent the remainder of the night reviewing the screenshots in order to get ready for the necessary discussion. Every email and text served as a reminder to my family how readily Sarah had lied and how easily they had trusted her. The moment has come to finally correct the record. I had an odd variety of feelings as I shut down my laptop and prepared for bed. Although the truth was at last known, the narrative did not stop there. It was only the start of a new chapter in which, for the first time in months, I would regain control of my story. I had a flash of hope. I had no idea how things would turn out, but I was certain that I would no longer let Sarah's falsehoods to define who I was. Now that I had the facts on my side, it was time to confront it. Jason's email made it clear to me what I needed to do. I couldn't keep this knowledge to myself. Even if it meant exposing previous scars, my family had to know the truth. I couldn't continue to live with the burden of Sarah's falsehoods, even if the idea of facing them was scary. To comprehend what they had done to me, they needed to see the evidence. I woke up the following morning feeling apprehensive yet resolved. In an attempt to be ready for every response, I spent hours reviewing the screenshots and practicing my responses. I decided it was time by the afternoon. I picked up my phone, inhaled deeply, and dialed my mother. A few rings later, she picked up. "Hi there?" She seemed hesitant, as though she wasn't sure why I had called. "Mom, it's me," I spoke, attempting to maintain a steady tone. "I have to speak with Dad and you. It's crucial." A pause occurred. "What quote is this about?" Her tone remained cautious as she inquired. I said, "It's about Sarah. What did she tell you about Jason and me? She lied and I can prove it." One more pause, this time longer. "All right," she responded at last. "Come on over." It seemed unreal to drive to their home. I hadn't returned since the evening I was expelled. Every turn and every street brought back memories of my former existence. My heart was racing by the time I turned into the driveway. I tried to relax by sitting in the car for a while. I then went to the door after grabbing my phone, the screenshots, and the printouts I had created of Jason's email. I knocked, but my mother opened it. She was older and more worn out than I had recalled. She moved aside to let me enter without saying anything. In the living room, my dad sat with an unfathomable expression on his face. I was thankful that Sarah wasn't present. I wasn't yet prepared to confront her. I took a seat across from them and took out the papers, my hands trembling a little. "Please read this for me," I stated as I gave them to them. My dad leaned in to look over my mom's shoulder as she accepted the papers. Except for the rustle of paper as they read, the room was quiet. I looked intently at their faces. My dad's jaw stiffened and my mom's eyes grew wide. They remained silent until they were done. "It's from Jason." At last, my father requested in a hushed voice. I gave a nod. He apologized for everything in an email to me. It wasn't me that cheated, but Sarah. To hide her identity, she told lies. "And you thought she was real?" "Definitely." When my mother put the papers down, her hands shook. We were unaware," she muttered. "No," I answered, sounding harsher than I meant to. "You were unwilling to find out." Believing her and blaming myself was simpler than confronting the reality. My father turned his head away. I could only assume that the redness on his face was humiliation. He said, "We believed we were on the right track, the appropriate action." I said it again, my rage rising to the surface. "Without even hearing my side of the story, you kicked me out of the house. You didn't just believe what Sarah said. Because of her falsehoods, you ruined my life." My mother's eyes begged as she stretched out. Her voice cracked as she continued, "We're sorry. There was nothing more we could do." I shook my head and withdrew my hand. "For that, it is too late." I said, "Your apologies remain unchanged. What took place? It was you who caused me to lose everything. My family, my house, and my tranquility. We wish to put things right." With a hard yet gentle tone, my father spoke. "We are aware of our error." I couldn't sit there any longer, so I got up. "An error," I said, raising my voice. "This wasn't only an error. You flung me aside as if I didn't matter because you choose to believe a lie. You want to make it right now?" They had nothing to say. While my dad gazed at the floor, my mom just sat there with tears running down her cheeks. My voice quivered with emotion as I added, "I'm not here to make you feel better. I needed you to know the truth, which is why I'm here. I needed you to witness the harm you inflicted. We are aware," my mother muttered. "We are aware that we have offended you." In an attempt to regain my composure, I inhaled deeply. I said, "I'm not sure whether I'll ever be able to forgive you, but at least you are aware of the reality today." I turned and left the home after saying that. Even though my hands were shaking and my pulse was racing, I felt a weird feeling of relaxation. They were no longer able to deny the facts. They had to accept the fact that they had now realized the suffering they had inflicted. A burden left my shoulders as I climbed into my car and drove gone. Although it wasn't entirely resolved, it was a positive move. I felt as though I had reclaimed a portion of my life for the first time in a long time, and that was sufficient for the time being. It seemed unreal to drive away from my parents' house after addressing them. I had the impression that I was leaving more than simply their house behind. Years of grief, betrayal, and rage were behind me. They realized they had been mistaken when the truth was ultimately revealed. However, there is a big difference between knowing and solving things. My parents' reactions when they saw Jason's email were replayed in my mind for days following the incident. After I explained everything, there was a lingering stillness in the room, and it was colorful. They expressed regret. Yes, but saying sorry doesn't make up for the years I felt alienated and like the bad guy in a tale I didn't even write. Naturally, Megan was there as soon as I arrived home. She had been my pillar of support during this entire ordeal, and she asked me right away how I was doing. I dropped my suitcase on the floor and shrugged. Now they are aware of the reality. Even when they apologized, nothing truly changed. She smiled slightly and nodded. "It's out there now, at least. I mean, that must feel a little better." I sighed deeply as I took a seat on the couch. I suppose it does, but I feel as though I'm unsure of how to react. It's been a long time since I wanted them to realize the truth. It's simply strange now that they do, though. With her hand on my shoulder, Megan sat next to me. It's messy, she remarked. It's not like this tidy little box where everything suddenly feels better. Of course, she was correct. Tie things up with a pretty ribbon isn't what closure is all about. The goal is to find calm within the chaos, and I was attempting to accomplish that. In the days that followed, try to find some sort of calm. My parents made an effort to get in touch. My mother texted me virtually every day to ask if we could start over, if I could come over for dinner, or if we could chat more. In an unusual move, my dad even left a voicemail. He sounded strained, as if he was unsure of what to say yet felt compelled to speak. We sincerely apologize, dear. All we want to do is put things right. The problem is that I wasn't prepared. I wasn't prepared to sit down at the dinner table and pretend that the previous few years hadn't happened and that everything was okay. Although being aware of the reality lessened the sorrow, their treachery nevertheless caused profound wounds. My mom texted me, and I replied with brief but kind messages. Fortunately, she understood when I informed her that I needed time. She wasn't pressuring or attempting to use guilt to get me to forgive them on her time frame for once. That tiny act of kindness allowed me the time I needed to reflect. I made the decision to take a walk one evening. I needed to decompress, and the weather was pleasant. As I strolled across the park, I reflected on all of my experiences, being expelled. I'm having trouble getting my bearings. The ongoing pain of having lost my family and now being on the other side of everything. I came to a significant realization. I was alive. I was still standing after surviving one of the most trying and agonizing situations of my life. Although I was scarred, I wasn't broken. I had put my life back together, discovered a strength I never knew I possessed, and shown myself that I could withstand even the most severe form of betrayal. I had a wave of calm as I stood there taking in the sunset. The calm wasn't ideal. It wasn't as though things had suddenly improved. However, it was sufficient. Enough to serve as a reminder that I could move on without my parents' approval or their incessant excuses. When I returned home, I could find closure on my own terms. I chose to compose a letter, a genuine handwritten letter, not a text or email. Writing things down felt more definitive and honest for some reason. I took a seat at my little table and began composing a letter to my parents. I've been reflecting on all that has transpired, about the deception, the treachery, and now the reality. Thank you, and I know you're sorry. But I must make it clear to you that there is no quick remedy for this. Your apology doesn't make the hurt I've been carrying go away. I require time. It's processing time. It's time to recover and consider what a future relationship with you would entail. Although I haven't forgiven you yet, I'm not saying I never will. I hope that makes sense to you. I need space for now. I must put my life and myself first. Please be mindful of it. I will get in touch when I'm prepared. Till then, be careful. Love, my name. It seemed as if a burden had been removed after writing that letter. The goal was not to permanently cut them off. It was about taking charge of my recovery and establishing limits. The next day, I mailed the letter after slipping it inside an envelope and addressing it. They didn't get back to me for a long after that. I felt like I could breathe for the first time in a long time when they complied with my plea for space. I believed that the altercation with my parents was the end of it. After saying what I had to say, I assumed that life would progress gradually. However, it turns out that Sarah's karma had other ideas. To be honest, I don't feel guilty about it. A few weeks after I left my parents' place, it began modestly. Megan gave me a call. I just heard something that you won't believe, she said, hardly able to control her enthusiasm. What is going on? Curious, I asked. Sarah's social circle seems to be beginning to fall apart. Megan said that news is spreading about what she did, and that one of my coworkers knows her through some common acquaintances. A tiny glimmer of satisfaction flickered through me. What are they saying exactly? They're discussing how she cheated on Jason and then held you accountable. Her falsehoods are beginning to be exposed. I couldn't resist grinning. It appeared as though the true Sarah was at last being seen. A steady stream of stories began to come in over the following few weeks. Sarah's reputation was obviously suffering, and Megan would tell me about the rumors she heard. Previously admiring friends were suddenly avoiding her. She was no longer frequently invited to gatherings by people she used to spend out with. She seemed to be gradually losing contact with the social sphere she used to dominate. Then the news arrived. I was surprised. My mom texted me one evening as my phone buzzed. "We must speak. Would you be able to visit?" I contemplated replying, but my curiosity overcame me. My mom appeared exhausted, as if she hadn't slept for days, when I got to their house. In the living room sat my father, his face as stern as ever. Sarah was expelled. My mother stated, cutting right to the chase. I blinked, surprised. What? Why? We can't deal with the troubles she's been causing. After all about her falsehoods was revealed, my dad replied in a rough voice. She has been attacking us and accusing us of being responsible for her disaster. We've had enough. I didn't know how to react. A part of me was relieved that they were now recognizing what I had always understood. A part of me, however, was shocked that this was the situation. How did she act? I inquired. My interest was aroused. According to my mother, she has been having tantrums and denying any responsibility for anything. Things worsened after you departed. She began making trouble at home and was dropped by her pals. She vented her anger on us. My father gave a headshake. We were no longer able to handle it. She has overreached herself. Leaning back, I took in what they had to say. Now, where is she? We're not sure. My mother acknowledged that we haven't heard from her since she departed last week. I couldn't help but have a peculiar spectrum of feelings. In my parents' perspective, Sarah had always been the perfect child, the one who could do no wrong. Finally, they were able to see her for who she truly was. It was heartbreaking and satisfying. She is getting what she put in. We really can't repair things for her this time, my dad continued. I noticed a flicker of sorrow in their eyes for the first time, not only for evicting Sarah, but also for their treatment of me. I didn't hear anything about Sarah for long after that. However, I managed to run into a high school acquaintance who knew her one day. She pulled me aside and said, "Hey, are you aware of Sarah's situation?" "Not really," I said. "What's happening?" She said that she is now essentially alone. All of her pals have abandoned her. A person who lies like that is not someone anyone wants to be around. Unsurprised, I nodded. It sounds about right. She's attempting to connect with others, but nobody is answering. As of the last time I heard, she is attempting to start again by residing with a distant cousin out of town. That should have given me a sense of victory, but it didn't. It felt hollow instead. Sarah was resting in her own grave, which she had dug herself. Although I didn't feel sorry for her, I also wasn't as content as I had anticipated. I thought back on all that had transpired as I sat in my apartment later that evening. Sarah was the cause of her own demise, her deception and manipulation. She was now paying the price since they had all come back to haunt her. Her friends had deserted her, my parents had expelled her, and she was on her own. I never expected to witness such beautiful justice. More importantly, though, it served as a reminder that decisions have repercussions. Although I wasn't the one to bring Sarah to her knees, her life had fallen apart. It was enough to watch karma work. I didn't have to do any filthy work. By itself, life has a way of bringing everything into balance. Ultimately, I came to a significant realization. Retaliation wasn't necessary for me to go forward. Sarah was dealing with the fallout from her actions now that the truth had been out. For me, that was plenty. I wasn't going to waste any more energy on her or the past since I had my own life to live. Getting even wasn't the goal of closure. The topic was letting go. And I had just that in mind.